What I want to talk about today isn't so much the nuts and bolts of the mechanics of Toyota Kata. In the time we have, what I want to talk about is what it is, what it's trying to accomplish, and how this Toyota Kata thing fits into the continuum of lean or continuous improvement or anything else we're trying to do. I like to go back to this story. I was actually, in the same period of time during the Great Recession, I had time on my hands, and consultants, friends of mine, invited me over to their place, which was in Amsterdam. And the first place they took me to was this huge company. It was a big steel mill, and it was really interesting because the continuous improvement team with their continuous improvement director was kind of walking me through what their program had been, how they were engaging the company. And this quote up here is really how their director summed it up. We've spent 7 million euros and we still don't have a lean culture. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So I asked a question. I asked, what do you mean when you say lean culture? What would it look like? What would you see if you had a lean culture? And the response was, well, people would find and eliminate waste every day. Okay, that's actually an outcome. Um, what would you actually observe? What would you see if they were doing that? And this was interesting because this is the point when I hit their threshold of knowledge. They really hadn't thought about what people would actually do on a daily basis to find and eliminate waste every day. So if they found waste and actually, in that waste paradigm, once you teach people what it looks like, they see it all the time. But what do you expect them to do if they see it? And they didn't really have an action in their minds for that. So that brings up some questions when we talk about lean culture. So I want to talk about those two things kind of separately. First, when we say the word culture, what do we mean? So the best way to describe it is to just show a couple of examples. So this is what I would call a transactional culture, where I've got I want what I want from people is their time and participation, and in exchange, I give them tangible and intangible rewards. And that kind of works with people as individuals, with the supervisor or the team leader basically orchestrating everybody's individual task. And this is also what refer to as kind of a mechanistic model. And there's some assumptions that are built into this. Primarily, the assumption is that people respond best to positive and negative reinforcement. I'll give you your tangible rewards. If you give me what I want, I'll give you something you don't want. If you don't give me what I want. And this underlying belief, in turn, is going to drive the structure of the organization. It's going to drive the artifacts. It's going to drive the conversations. It's going to drive how people report things. And that, in turn, reinforces that underlying belief. And so you get this reinforcing loop going where the more we double down on control, the more we have to double down on control. So a different model would be one of teamwork. So if I had a culture of teamwork, the interaction patterns are much different, because now the leadership, rather than looking to manage the transactions and manage compliance, is really looking to maintain clarity amongst the team, is looking to help them develop their skills as individuals and as a team, and is working to build trust, not simply between the leadership and the team members, but among the team members. This is a very different environment, and I would see and hear different things. There are different underlying assumptions about people that are built into a culture such as this one. The key point I'm trying to make here is that culture isn't a thing. Culture is an emergent property of the normal, habitual patterns of interaction within the organization between people and between groups of people. How do they talk to each other? What do they talk about? What is it that triggers a conversation? If we're trying to adjust culture, this is what we want to focus on. So the next question then is, if somebody new joins the organization, How do they learn what the culture is? How do they assimilate into it? What are the forces in play that will shape somebody's behavior ultimately to conform to the norms of the culture? Because that's what either that happens or they're a bad fit and they leave, or they're a bad fit and they're pushed out. That's really the only thing that's going to occur here. So this is my model. It's derived from one of Mike Rother's models. We've got these rituals, these habits, the norms of how people routinely interact to get things done. What's going to happen is if they violate any of those norms, they're going to get corrected in a friendly way. Hey, this is how we do this here. Oh, okay. And over a pretty brief period of time, they'll observe, they'll pay attention, they want to fit in, and they will begin engaging in the same patterns that everybody around them is engaging in. Now, what is derives what the routines of the organization are those underlying assumptions about how we need to get things done. But most organizations don't know what those assumptions are. Here's a classic case. I worked with a company. They said that they valued initiative, but if you wanted to spend more than $2,000, the COO of this multi-billion-dollar company had to personally sign off. And I don't just mean give permission. He got a piece of paper that he had to write his name on. What's the underlying tacit assumption that says if you, even as a senior manager, you need the number two guys in the company's permission to spend $2,000? So those routines and habits are reinforcing those underlying assumptions. So we teach the mindset and behavior because we have the structure. So somebody new comes in, they're going to learn very quickly that if the COO has a sign off on $2,000 of expenditures, that this is the norm of the organization. And they're going to learn pretty quickly that in reality, trust isn't a real big thing here. And their behavior will reflect that. So when I talk about a culture, really, it's the combination in my mind of these underlying assumptions about people that in turn are driving the way they interact with each other. And this is unconscious. It's very quick. This is almost an expression of people's values. It's almost a black and white, right and wrong. That's not the way it's done. So this is a very powerful reinforcing loop. And I just wanted to point this out because it's insanely difficult to change this because it so reinforces so heavily. So we teach those habits, those beliefs that we in turn have learned through repetition and experience. So that's a little bit about what culture is. Now, if it was a culture of continuous improvement, coming back to my steel mill, what would you see? How could you tell? Let's talk about how lean was traditionally been taught. When we first heard about Toyota and Toyota-like companies, we sent a bunch of people over to Japan to look at them. And a lot of them were engineers. And they came back and said, all this stuff, this is the stuff they do. They have this thing called 5S. They have moving assembly lines. They have standard work. They have Kanban. They have one-piece flow. And the assumption was that if we could make our operations incorporate the same tools, we too would get the same results they're getting. These are the process mechanics, and they're really easy to see, especially if they're done well. But my question is, if this is what defines lean, what are the people doing? Because all we're talking about here are the mechanics of process. So the next round of people rafting their way over to Japan started asking the benchmark companies, hey, there's more to it than this. And they kind of said, well, yeah, I think so. We have these principles, right? We don't waste time or resources making defective goods, and the Japanese jargon word for that is jidoka. We don't waste time or resources making things that aren't needed right now, and the Japanese jargon word for that is just in time. We have these sayings that we have respect for people, that we are striving toward ideal flow, We have to discover things through experimentation. All these things are true. And we made posters on the wall that had all these things that were there. And those are core values that are required to make it work. They kind of define the true north. But at the next level down, though, are the unspoken assumptions that actually shape the culture. And if you look at that benchmark company, we are responsible for developing our people is something that they don't explicitly put on a poster on the wall. But if you look at how they behave, everything is around that. The best learning comes from experience. That actually makes a lot of sense because if you look at Sakichi Toyota with a D, who founded the company, he was an inventor and he learned by tinkering with things. He learned experientially, so that attitude comes up. We are responsible for shaping our own future. Very strong sense of that. And those are the things that shape the culture, that drive those core values, that in turn the process mechanics put into place. The stuff that's above the water is really easy to see, but those are outcomes of a mindset. The stuff that's below the surface is the thinking and the mindset and the patterns of interaction and what they talk about. So where lean has been taught is the stuff at the top. We absolutely have to have these fundamental principles to strive forward. But when we're dealing with the world of Toyota Kata, it's really operating, I'm going to say, not even on the ice, it's operating in the water that's holding up the ice. The key here is back to my original question of that lean director, what are you trying to achieve? So I like to use this quote from Alice in Wonderland. Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here? Well, that depends a good deal where you want to go, said the cat. I don't much care where, said Alice. And it doesn't matter which way you go, said the cat, so long as I get somewhere. Oh, you'll surely do that if only you walk long enough. And this highlights that we have to have an answer to what kind of culture are you striving for? And can you describe it? How do people and groups interact in your future state? What would you see? What would you hear? And to be thinking about that before you start talking about process challenges, KPIs, operational metrics, and all the good reasons why we want to take this on entirely. But unless you are striving toward the kind of culture that delivers high performance, all that other stuff is really hard to get into place and even harder to sustain. So I have seen very briefly, and again, I can do a whole talk just on this, but if I look at long-term excellent organizations, they're really good at problem solving, which is not the same as firefighting. I can talk about how firefighters fight fire sometime. And that's excellence in the here and now, and that's pretty easy to see. But the other thing that really distinguishes them is they also work on developing people's problem-solving skills. So they work on solving problems in a way that develops people's problem-solving skills to give them excellence in the future. And I want to dwell on this a bit because so often we have a very small cadre of half a dozen people who are the lean experts. They're the problem solving experts, and they're the ones who do all of the heavy lifting for process improvement. And they think they're helping, and they do it for the supervisors and for the managers. Here, we'll fix this for you. But that's not solving the problem in a way that develops people's problem solving skills. And that is where you end up with the organization utterly dependent on that small cadre of people being the go-to people over and over and over again. And it's hard to sustain. So we talked about culture. We talked about the culture we want. We can kind of think about the culture we have. How do we change it? And here's what doesn't work. Okay. Our traditional approach has been to try to educate people. Here's what you need to do. and educate them. And you need to believe different things. You need to believe in teamwork. You need to believe your people can do this. You need to believe and then we blame lack of commitment when it doesn't work. The issue here is we tend to do is put people in a big class and they might learn about the subject. I've been in that classroom. I didn't learn, if you think about a university, okay, and that's obviously what this picture is. When I took Calc 101, you didn't learn calculus in the lecture. The lecture was about is what you needed to practice doing homework. And where you learn the math skills was in doing the homework. And that's a fundamental paradigm that in corporate land, we tend to forget that. And we tend to think we can lecture people into new skills or different habits. What it takes is practice. It takes deliberate practice with correction. So this little kid here who's learning to play the piano, he probably knows what correct sounds like to him. And when he hits the wrong note, he is going to immediately cringe and he's going to go back and try it again. And then when he's reciting for his teacher, the same thing's going to happen. And the teacher will give him another drill and give him something else to try to take his skill incrementally to the next level for the next lesson. This is what deliberate practice is about. People learn what they practice. And in corporate world, they learn the mindset and the culture by practice and correction, whatever it is. And this slide from Mike is awesome. I love this illustration because this was the world I was in. We did Kaizen events, and we thought it would be really awesome if every team member got into 1 or 2 Kaizen events a year, and maybe the leaders get into a couple more. But what happens the rest of the time? What happens starting Monday morning after that Kaizen event is we're back to what we normally do to get the stuff out the door. Unless we're practicing what we learned in the Kaizen event every day, we're practicing business as usual. And this is the model where the only people who are doing this all the time are the people leading the Kaizen events. They get really good at it, but they're not the ones in charge every day. So these things revert back. So what should we be teaching people to practice, and how should we teach it? And this is a very informal phrasing of Mike's original research questions, which paraphrasing are, what's the secret sauce at Toyota? And the second research question is, how can other companies learn the same thing? So what we want is to learn the problem-solving mindset. That scientific thinking pattern, we have a model for it, but we also need to have a practice routine that follows the model in order to learn and internalize it. What that does is that gives us a scaffolding, that gives us a structure that people can work safely within while they build their experience and they build their skills, and things then become second nature. And then it's possible to take down the scaffolding. It's possible to let go of the drills, to stop doing wax on, wax off, and just begin practicing the moves as they come. So we have 2 practice patterns. The first of these practice patterns is what Mike Rosenthal calls the improvement kata. And it's a model for scientific thinking. It has 4 fundamental steps, each of which we can spend an hour on. The first is to understand the direction or challenge. And this really is, what problem am I trying to solve at a big, higher level? And or what am I trying to learn about, which in reality is the same thing. And that's part of the mindset. Steve Spear has a great quote, which I love: the root cause of all problems is ignorance. There's something we don't know. The reason we can't get this level of performance is we don't know how. So we have to learn. Then I'm going to look at where am I now. I'm going to grasp the current condition. And we're doing a big deep dive on this, and we do it every year. And this is where really a lot of the time gets spent. And really, what I'm trying to learn is, what do I know for sure? What do I not know based on the evidence? What is my threshold of knowledge? Where's the limit between what I know and what I don't know? And as I understand how things are operating today, what emerges for me is the next place I want to go. Not all the way to the challenge typically, because that's often pretty big, but what's the next intermediate step that I want to get to in a couple of weeks? Or where am I trying to go next? And then what obstacles will I have to overcome in order to get there? Or in other words, what will I need to learn? And once I've got that, I've got a list now of small problems that I need to figure out how to solve. I can pick those off one by one, and I can start running experiments to learn more about those problems, or running experiments to try countermeasures that will overcome them. And I'm going to do that until something works, and then I'll pick off the next obstacle and the next obstacle. So this is that underlying pattern. So to put it in a different graphic, which explains it a little better, a little more dynamically, is the first thing we have the learner do is to understand the direction or challenge. Now, this is the model where typically maybe that challenge comes from a higher level. That's the ideal if you're in a corporate or organization, and I need the learner to understand it and to be able to articulate it back in a way that yeah, that's it. That's basically if I'm a coach, the learner can say, this is where I think we're trying to go, and I agree. That's what that conversation might sound like. And then it's incumbent on the learner now to go and grasp the current condition. Now, as a coach, I will likely, especially if they're a beginner, spend a lot of time with them, because there's 5 high-level steps and a bunch of little ones to do this. That's the starting point, but it's also very situational around what exactly is the nature of the issue we're looking at and the nature of the process. Once they have that current condition, as a coach, I will ask them, okay, what's your next target condition? And that's incumbent on the learner to establish, and different learners will establish different target conditions. And as long as it's moving in the direction of the challenge and makes sense as a coach, I'm good with that, especially the early ones. You really can't get the early one wrong, because if you got it wrong, you'll find out right away, and then we learn something. Now, this red line kind of represents what we call the threshold of knowledge, the limit of what we know for sure. So you can see right away that we don't have enough information to get to the next target condition. We're going to have to learn our way there. So if you think of it, you can't predict the path. You can't set out a sequence of steps that you know that if you follow them, you'll get to that next target condition. Because the minute you cross that red line, all you can do is experiment and learn. You don't know what's going to work past that red line. So that path is often unpredictable. And the key here is there could be lots of potential problems, but the ones I want to deal with are the ones that are in the way of getting to that next target condition. And I'm not going to try to solve every problem I can think of, just enough of them that I get to that target condition in order to learn enough to get to that target. And then we set a new target. And what that process kind of looks like is, as the learner is progressing up that path, the current condition is changing, right? Because we're running experiments and we're making change, and their current condition changes. And eventually the current condition becomes the target condition. And then we start again. We grasp the current condition at the bigger picture, establish the next target condition, and lather, rinse, repeat until we hit the challenge. Now, this models that scientific and thinking and creative process. It gives us practice routines that coaches can use to teach learners to do it, but it is not a solo activity. And this is where a lot of people get stuck, and especially, honestly, the people who have read the book and think it's cool, and they just start trying to do it. And that's awesome. Please don't not do it. Okay. but you're going to run into a limit, and that limit is your own knowledge. And so this is my metaphor. No one gets to this level alone. No one gets to a world class on the podium level. Every one of these women has a coach. Now, the interesting thing is these women are far better skiers than their coaches are, or their coaches would be on the podium, right? What's the coach doing? Well, the coach is watching very carefully as she skis. Hey, you kicked up a little ice there. Now that's really important at this level because there's 64/100ths of a second between number 16 on top and number 22 who's watching from the side who didn't get anything. Okay, that's pretty competitive level. But even in our world, what the coach can do is provide perspective to help the learner, to help the improver see what she can't see when she's really engaged with trying to solve a problem. What the coach can do is help that learner see how she's going about solving the problem so that she's solving it in an effective way. So it's hard to do alone because it's human nature and it's all too easy to practice what we already know how to do. And we just do it again and do it again. And that is so much easier than struggling to learn something new. And that's the other thing the coach provides is encouragement and constantly, gently, gradually raising the bar of performance so that these problem solving skills get better and better. To develop any skill, you want frequent practice, ideally a little bit every day. And this would be the same thing if you were trying to learn to play the piano, right? It's the same thing. You want to practice a little bit every day. You need to have some kind of structured routine, especially for a beginner. Again, back to musical instruments, the first thing they learn are the scales. Why? So that they don't have to think about where to move their fingers to get a certain sound to come out. Then coaching really helps to give that corrective feedback and ensure the learner is practicing the right patterns. Because practice does not make perfect, practice makes permanent. And so if somebody is practicing every day, but they're practicing the wrong thing, they're just going to embed something that doesn't work into their habit. And then finally, the learner has to bring that self-efficacy, the enthusiasm to the table, but the coach also is there to encourage, is there to help, and is there to make sure that the learner can see that they're making progress and that they're getting better at this. That building of that sense of competence through a good relationship where the learner is, they're working on their own, but they have this structure behind them and they know that that structure is behind them is a really big deal here. So let's talk a little bit more about coaching. The fundamental pattern here is the coaching kata. We have a structure for that too. And that is what gives leaders, and I use the word leaders deliberately here, a standardized approach that they can use to develop their coaching skill in the course of their daily work. That daily work is developing the improvement skill of the people who work for them. And I can't emphasize this enough. The only thing as a leader in any organization you can do is improve the skill of your people to improve their process. You can't do it for them. There's just too much to get done. And together, this improvement kata and the coaching kata teach and develop a system of management which takes us back to that steel mill. This is what I would want to see. These are the kinds of conversations that I want to see people having every single day. And that is how, in the lean director's words, people see and eliminate waste. I don't use those terms anymore, but that's what results from it. So what is the coach's responsibility in this model? Is that there is a corridor, so to speak, not so much guardrails because you can drive right over them, but rumble strips. And as long as the learner is engaging in a good scientific thinking and is using facts and data and active learning and looking to see what should have happened, what's actually happened, why is there a difference, what gap am I trying to close, what's the next thing I'm going to try to close that gap, what did I actually do, what have I learned from that, then the learner is in that space. So the coach's job is to pay attention to how the learner is thinking and see if the learner is operating by jumping to conclusions, is assuming things that don't have evidence or example. And those become teachable moments for the coach to nudge the learner back into the improvement kata pattern. The coaching questions, which I'm going to go through, are designed to arrive at a common understanding between the coach and the learner of where that threshold of knowledge actually is. The next experiment should be designed to learn in order to advance that threshold of knowledge, and we know a little more and can anchor on that. So I'm using Mike Rother's card because that's the most generic version out there. At Kata School Cascadia, we have our own version, which is a little different. That's derived from what the Kata Girl Geeks put together. So there's a lot going on with that, and you'll see different people have slight variations on these. But I'm going to start with the one that is the baseline, and I just want to go through these questions because I think this is really important. So the question 0 might be, what's your challenge? Just to reiterate that we still have good understanding of that. The first formal question, what is your target condition? And I want to ask that every time. Where are you trying to go right now? And make sure that's well articulated. And what is the actual condition now? And as a coach, what I'm looking for is a clear understanding of the gap that exists right this second between these two. Then we have a little session of reflection where we're going to look at, okay, the last time we talked, you said you were going to take a step. What was that step? Just to review it. And what did you expect? What did you say you would learn or would happen as a result of taking that step? Then we move into new territory. Okay, what actually happened and what did you learn? And what you'll see here again is a gap between what we expected to happen and what actually happened, only now at a smaller level. And from any difference, we have some conclusion that we can draw, something we learned about the process, about our own limit of understanding about something. Then I'm going to come back around and, as a coach, okay, what obstacles do you think are preventing you from reaching the target condition? And I'm looking for just just go through the list of the problems that need to be overcome. And then critically, which one are you addressing now? What one problem are we talking about? Because we want to knock these off one at a time. Now, I'll say there are exceptions. They're very rare. I would caution against dealing with more than one at a time, unless you talk to one of us first, and we'll probably talk you down from it. So then, based on that, what is the next step you plan to take, or the next experiment you want to run? And what do you expect, or what do you expect to learn as a result of taking that step? And then finally, okay, how quickly can we go and see what we have learned from taking that step? Because the coach likely doesn't know either. We're moving into new territory. If the organization knew how to do this, it would already be done. So this is a process of learning, and it's a process of teaching the learner to learn. And that's really what this is about. The right process produces the right results. So if we do a good job coaching people, then we teach good improvement thinking, we develop capable and competent people, and we align the effort so that they're all working to pull us toward that higher level objective. And it is those good, capable, competent people who deliver process improvement. And this is important because, if you know, to use a sports metaphor, right? The coach can't play. If the team wants to win, the only thing the coach can do is develop the players. and help them with their individual skills and help them work together as a team. And if he's successful at doing that, then the team gets better at playing the game. And so this is the same model because the coach is ultimately responsible for wins and losses, but they can only get wins by developing the team. This is the culture we want to create. Toyota Kata gives us starting level mechanics that we can practice in order to begin to move the culture in this direction. So the hypothesis is that we can teach a rigorous problem-solving mindset through deliberate practice so that our habitual response to the unknown is that we're going to work to understand the direction and challenge, to grasp the current condition, establish a target condition, and start to experiment against obstacles so that the unknown becomes a known. That is the underlying hypothesis. Did that create any questions for anybody? I'm going to open this up to whatever conversations you all care to have.
Okay, Mark, we have a question. I know that Mike Rother studied this at Toyota and he saw that the managers are the coaches. We start with teaching Toyota Kata and relatively quickly because no one wants to wait very long. The managers should coach their people, but perhaps they've not really practiced very much. And it's really, from my experience, it is very difficult because they don't want to get it wrong. I thought perhaps where we don't have the learning culture yet, it's better or perhaps more effective or easier to start with coaching on a peer-to-peer level. So to kind of build this culture before we start with a manager and their direct report line for coaching. Would love to know what you're thinking about that.
So it's going to be very situational. And from those specialists, right, that are working, yeah, you're working on the technical things, but you are doing it in order to deliberately move the structure of the conversation in the direction you think it needs to go. So as a change agent, the thing you're trying to improve is the culture itself. And sometimes that means you start by doing a lot of the heavy lifting on your own. But it's important not to get sucked into the minutia and to be running experiments yourself as a change agent to what's the next intervention, the next thing that I'm going to try to get that leader a bit more engaged in this than they are now, because that's what the measure of progress is.
And Mark, we have another question. So this person says, I'm curious if you could go more into how to overcome the culture of firefighting, specifically as you get closer to the front line, because we see there's a disconnect where you have directors and managers who are very, very good with a lot of what we talked about today. And then there's a disconnect when it gets down the line. I'm curious if you have any thought on that.
First, if there's something that is really urgent that we just need to fix now and somebody knows how to fix it, just fix it. Okay, just to be clear. But any action we take can be treated as a hypothesis. And the simple act of, okay, what are we going to do? Let's write that down. We probably are already. Action items, right? Let's write down what we expect to happen, make a prediction based on that action, and then actually go back and check whether it worked or not. And we're starting the process of engaging the thinking pattern in the context of solving an urgent problem. So you can introduce as much of the structure as the current environment will tolerate at that point. But if you can just get people to pause and look back and say, did that actually do what we thought? You're starting to make progress, because so many times we equate doing a lot of stuff with actually solving the problem. And so, did it work? And the other thing I'll add here is the very best you can to have these actions one at a time, because about the worst thing you can do is make half a dozen changes to a process and it works because you've learned nothing and you don't know what the effect of those individual changes was. and you can end up in a superstitious belief system where I have to do all of these things. When in reality, only one of them actually had the effect you wanted. So if you can get people to back up and try it and test one idea at a time, they'll be learning more about the current condition, because if they see something doesn't work, hopefully that'll spark some curiosity. What have we learned on that? What else do we need to understand? Because we thought that would work. Okay, what did we learn that we didn't know before? Based on that, what could we try next in order to learn something else? That's a general answer. A lot of it just requires getting down in the situation and helping people slow down a bit, because you will go faster by slowing down in this case. And good questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark, for doing that for everyone. It's really wonderful. If you don't already, follow us on LinkedIn. We've got other
Yeah.
events coming up. I know there's lots of friends in the room who are already part of that group, but there's also some of you who are maybe new to Cascadia. So if you follow us on LinkedIn, it's a good way to find out about other events coming up.
Yeah.
And also there's always the Friday calls,
Yeah.
the infamous Friday calls at noon Pacific time, where you get to come along and bring your questions and learn from people like Mark, who have been doing this a very long time. And there's 2 meetings on a Friday. The first one at 12 o'clock is for anybody. So you can be as new to this as you only heard the word yesterday, and feel free to come on a Friday and ask whatever you need to move your learning forward. And then the second meeting at 12:30 is for coaches. So if you're practicing this and you're following these routines, then you can come along and talk about that as well with other coaches.
The only real difference is we tend to get a little more esoteric in the second one.
Yeah, properly geeky. We get really geeky on the second one.
Thank you all for attending, and I really appreciate it. And hopefully I'll see you all on Friday.
Thanks, everyone.